more suitable advocate and champion for the science of gratitude than our guest today. Dan Winter has not only developed the equations, the formula, and the models which demonstrate the effect of gratitude within every living cell, but also has been the inventor and co-inventor of many technical applications such as Flame in Mind, I Thrive, Theraphi, and so on. Welcome, Dan. Thank you so much again for your generosity and sharing your time and your insights with us. Now, if it's okay with you, I'll just jump right in
Delighted
and ask
to be here. And you've been such a champion. I'm delighted to be here. Champion of what we do. Thank you, Shelley. All good.
Thank you so much. I'm going to jump right in with our leading question. What does gratitude, the Anu, heart of the sun, hydrogen, human heart, all have in common with gratitude?
Yeah, it's a wonderful old Sufi expression about the attitude of gratitude. Gives you leverage, gives you power over the situation ultimately. And it relates to what we've been studying about for many years, which is kind of the physics of compassion and how that steers tornadoes, actually. But as it was your suggestion, so maybe we should start with a little animation, which is how this perfected nesting, embedding centripetal force, which is the kind of wave mechanic geometry result of the attitude of gratitude. So if I can dig out that geometry here, let's see here now. Share desktop. One second. Where's the share? Oh, gallery. I need to find my little shared desktop.
Okay, that's okay. It should be right. It should be right down at the bottom, or if you hover over it with your mouse, maybe it'll be highlighted.
Invite.
Let's see here. Okay, and so you know what's been while you're digging around for that animation that I love so much. I wanted to ask you too about the magnetic field, perhaps that's created when we're in the Theraphi, you know, and how our thoughts and our choice have an effect on the human heart. Oh, there we go.
Yes, so we're getting the little desktop thing up. So yes, and the Theraphi produces that centripetal force as well. Yes, so I was just going to play the little animation of that we did here, which is at the top here. So you see that's the golden spiral on a cone, which makes the sort of two pine cones kissing noses idea. And that creates what's called perfected embedding or perfected entanglement or perfected nesting or perfected recursion. And that creates implosion of charge towards center, literally centripetal force towards center. And so there's these views of that, which if you see it from the side view, it's literally the caduceus. And from the top view, it's the swastika. It's literally the optimum way for charge to converge and therefore implode. And it's literally the Holy Grail. So it's true that, and later we proved that that's the geometry of hydrogen, the center of which is the Anu. But maybe we can make that more specific in a bit of a conversation then about how the attitude of gratitude creates that centripetal force. That years ago when we were studying the physics of compassion, we were doing EKG power spectra, and I guess I could say discovered that if you did a power spec frequency signature of the EKG harmonics at the moment of love, you got a broader cascade of harmonics called harmonic inclusiveness, which we later learned is the actual physics of how the immune system is created, and the immune system health is measured by how many harmonics are in your heart. And harmonic inclusiveness is very much akin to compassion, which is literally how much you can include in your heart, literally. And the number of different frequencies you can include in your heart is very much related to how many different people you can include in your heart. But so anyway, we discovered then that cascade of harmonics in the heart indicated literally something very deep about the physics of how the heartbeat originated. And maybe that's an excuse to play another little animation if I can find it here. That if we take this picture of the electrical origin of the heartbeat from Arthur T. Winfrey's When Time Breaks Down, The Origin of Cardiac Arrhythmia, which was his book about, you know, if your child came to you and said, you know, Daddy, where does my heartbeat come from? and you happen to be a scientist and you wanted to answer your child accurately, you would actually point to this picture, which is a deep study in the physics of how the waves converge at the very fractal sinoatrial node. And we now know that the healthy heart is fractal, Ari Goldberger's famous work. And so the waves of voltage or charge that converge at the spark gap, the perfect fractal spark gap, the sinoatrial node, as it were, which is the fibers of Purkinje, which are documentably fractal, perfect branching, that create this implosion. And the symmetry of the electrical waves converging at the heart at that moment are literally not just a donut inside a donut recursively, but it's literally if you see this dimple here, a tornado entering another tornado. So what you do when you choose compassion and literally the attitude of gratitude, you're choosing to create the centripetal force, which creates suction right here at this dimple and sucks the next bigger donut inside this imploding heart. And a longer and longer wave than a bigger donut on a bigger donut. That's called perfect nesting or perfect embedding. And we know the geometry of what allows little donuts to inhabit bigger donuts. Perfect embedding is idealized by golden ratio. And that implosion, which is the center of lowest pressure, we know is the physics of how all tornadoes are steered. So if you watch a shaman steering a tornado, and many people have with a bit of clairvoyance, you see a bit of suction happening between the plasmic body, called bioplasmic streamer, of the shaman, embed in the center of the tornado until the shaman becomes the center of gravity of the tornado and steers it. But if you ask the shaman what he's doing, he says, I'm eating the anger, which is to say I'm eating the hucha, which is to say I'm feeling for the pain of that tornado, which is to say his attitude is gratitude for the feelings of the tornado. And that results in the tornado falling in love with the shaman, which is to say embedding to realize that the tornado's own charge inertia is most likely to be immortalized if it chooses the shaman to be its center of gravity. So literally, when you're walking by a mountain, if you have an attitude of gratitude, the charge waves in that mountain choose to embed in you because you become the way for the charge of that mountain to become immortal, for the same reason that children all want to pee when you drive by a really good river. Okay.
Okay, so that's really fantastic. But you know, the shaman is activating that not only just with thought, but actual feeling going into that. And so is that creating a magnetic attraction? Is this a magnetic phenomenon?
Well, you know, it is. Some of the New Age people think that magnetics is separate from electric fields, and actually, all fields are toroidal and they're made of charge flux. And if you measure the component of charge inertia going in this vector, it's called magnetic. If you measure the same charge inertia in this vector as a pressure, it's called voltage. And actually, electromagnetic, there is no such thing as something electrical is not magnetic or vice versa, truly. Now, it's also true that there can be primarily one or the other component of the centripetal versus the perpendicular vector. But all electromagnetic fields have both perpendicular vectors because there's only one substance which actually flows, and that is the compressibility of charge, which is the unified field, sometimes called the ether, and the plus and minus charge is the yin and yang. And it is a superfluid, and it's how everything is connected.
So all of this potentiality is more phenomena, really. If you think of it as a field, it's more of a phenomenon field, a field of phenomena.
Well, the fundamental thing is, once you realize, you know, at one point you thought, oh, the universe is composed of molecules. Then you thought, oh, it's made of atoms. And then you think a little deeper, and, oh, it's just made of flow. Oh, so everything is a wave. Oh, well, gee, that's pretty boring because what are people then if everything's made of waves? In fact, it's a little bit intimidating. But once you get comfortable with that idea and you realize that whoever is steering the biggest tornado is what you used to call God, and you can actually have a lot of fun and steer some really big tornadoes. So reality is not an illusion any more than tornado is an illusion. It is all simply charge rotating. But if you identify with the largest field, you get lots of centripetal force and inertia. So what you used to call God is how big is your aura, quite literally. And charge implosion, which used to be called the quality of grace, is actually how you grow your aura.
Fantastic. And this charge rotation allows us to understand time. And I don't want to get too far away from our original topic of gratitude, but you had mentioned the shaman and how the shaman can move forward and backwards in what we perceive as time. Would you mind just giving us a little background into spin and how not just gravity, but specific to time?
Physics has intimidated people so much to make them think they cannot think clearly for themselves. But I tell you, you can think clearly for yourself and understand for yourself exactly what space, time, matter, mass, and time are. And it's so simple. The fact is, once you know that the ether, the unified field substance, whose key signature is called Planck, is simply the compressibility of plus and minus charge, behaving like a superfluid. And when that charge rotates, it stores some inertia, the only definition of mass. And when that same rotation is happening, that has a period, which is the only, I repeat, only definition of time. So spin rate is the only definition of time. Rotation is named time. That's it. So, for example, Einstein was actually quite wrong when he said that gravity bends space-time. That's an incorrect way of thinking about it. More correct is to understand that the reason the clock speeds up when it gets into intense acceleration named the gravity is because it changes the spin rate. Relative spin rate is time. Now let's just think about that, and I've talked about this before, but very briefly. Time reversal was first measured in phase conjugate optics, charge implosion, which is also negentropic, which is the inspiration for Theraphi. And where the two lasers meet like pine cones kissing noses in a phase conjugate mirror with super high dielectric is the holy grail, literally, because it's charge distribution permissive. And at that point where the pine cones kiss perfectly at the threshold called Planck, the waves are converted to longitudinal, then they're faster than light, and they can quote unquote time travel. It's even called time reversal. However, that is simpler than it first looks, because the time reversals that have been measured in physics are quite clear. As I've said this many times, you can time reverse rusted steel back to be unrusted, but you cannot do the reverse, which means time reversal as it's described and measured in physics, in phase conjugate optics, is quite clear. You can move toward order, but not away from it. That is named negentropy. Therefore, the only kind of time travel that physics has measured, time reversal, is the same thing as negentropy functionally, which is to say self-organizing. So that gets into some of the prepared thoughts I had for today, if I may, Shelley, just for a moment, which was I would call it the idiocies of physics, but we're going to be more polite. We're going to call this the sins of physics. When your child goes to school and you bankrupt the child before they enter the job market with student debt, and the physics teacher doesn't know why an object falls to the ground, but you pay him anyway. He doesn't know that the word physics is phi cycle, and he doesn't know why. The chemistry teacher doesn't know what the word chem means, which is access to a black hole. And the biology teacher doesn't know what bios means, which is beta means container, bi means a binary. When two halves of one container line up, they create self-organization called the bios, which is life. So the biology teacher doesn't know the electric field that causes a seed to grow or a child to grow. And the architecture professor doesn't know how to make a structure that can cause a seed to grow and doesn't know what electric field makes a seed to grow. And your religious studies teacher doesn't know how you make an aura that can go through death. So all these teachers that you're bankrupting your child to pay are in fact idiots. I mean, they're not serving survival because they don't know what it is. So I wanted to give a very, very specific example of that. which was what I was meditating on just after you called me and asked me to do this sharing. Here's what I was meditating, if I may. I hope it's a fun story. So there we were, discovering the physics of the origin of alphabet, specifically Hebrew and Sanskrit. Now, as you know, we had discovered that if you take the self-organizing golden spiral and the self-organizing torus, which is the shape of all charge, and you simply look at it from the symmetry face views of the, not cube octa or octa, but rather the tetra. So if you rotate that spiral and the shadow views of the tetra, and you've always seen the animations, the shadows of that spiral indexed by the tetra are called Hebrew and Sanskrit. And there, they have the tag end of the crownlets, which indicate your angle in the cube, and in the Sanskrit they use a vertical cross and bar. It does the same thing. It's the same element. So that was called E pluribus unum, or from many one, because we thought they were separate letters, but no, it's only one shape. Hello, this is the physics of one. Now, when we originally discovered that, we were playing with this famous television series. I believe it was called The Prisoner. And the problem of The Prisoner was, first, the hardest thing The Prisoner had to do initially was to figure out that he was in prison. Now, the point I'm going to try to make here is that the limitations of current physics is keeping your children in prison, literally. And here is why. Here is very specifically why. So remember, if you're walking on flat land and somebody tries to convince you that such a thing as a cube exists, you would laugh at them. You'd say, heck no, I'm living on flat land. There's no such possibility. And however, if you were on that flat land and someone started passing a cube vertically down through that piece of paper on its edge, you'd see a dot, triangle, hex, triangle, dot. And if you did that 1,000,000 times and someone's world is that piece of paper and they saw the dot, triangle, hexagram, dot, they saw that happen 1,000,000 times, they still wouldn't know what a cube was until they started doing what's called a rhythmic traverse, which is otherwise known as ritual. And they would walk in a circle and they would do what's called data sampling. And if the phase rate of that circle was in phase with the passage of the cube through the circle, suddenly what would pop into their head? The next dimension. They would be out of the prison. Oh, well, now supposing someone told you the only way you can superpose the next axis of spin symmetry on a tetracube is the golden ratio, which is what allows the cube here into this dodecahedron here. So the golden ratio is the edge ratio of the dodecahedron to the cube. And it's the only way that you can superpose the next axis of spin on a cube, because you rotate the cube, you tilt the cube 30 degrees, rotate, blink 5 times, then you have the pentadodeca. And that is the only way to the next dimension. And that's the beginning of phase conjugation, which is the way to the next dimension. Now, how is that letting your children out of prison? Let me tell you specifically, and I mean very specifically, that they desperately, desperately, desperately must know in their physics class. And this will be the end of my little drama, okay? But Einstein, I have this famous slide. It's called The Symptoms of Einstein-Induced Insanity. And, number one on that is the fact that you don't have a clue why objects fall to the ground. And you think that the speed of light is a speed limit, when the truth is, it is fatal not to go through the speed of light. So that is a prison for your children. And the same prison is why Einstein mistakenly said that all action at a distance is spooky, because Einstein didn't know the way through the speed of light. Now, the way through the speed of light is quite obvious. When that wave goes down that, now I guess we need one more picture. Maybe this is the last one for the drama here. Share one more picture. Okay, let's see if this is gonna work. Yes, here we go. And we need this image here. Conjugate vision. This is the lecture I did recently for the University of Missouri vision class, and here's the picture. Okay, so all electromagnetics that we use conventionally, it's called transverse, the waves go up and down, so the slinky's going like this. But if you take that transverse wave and put it down the golden spiral on the cone to the tip of that cone, which is the Planck dimension, at that point, the up and down motion, the transverse inertia, which will never reach implosion, it will never reach the center of the nucleus, it'll never reach the center of the cell, and never become centripetal, and never do any healing, it'll never go faster than light, and never do action at a distance. So you gotta get out of the transverse into the longitudinal. And by the way, it's the only way to lucid dream and take memory through death. So it's an important path. So when the wave emerges on the right, and you've seen this slide before, suddenly now what was going up and down is now a longitudinal or compressional wave, which is incorrectly called scalar or torsional, and documented faster than light. And interferometry enables action at a distance. And coherence for that in your aura enables you to take memory through death. And that is the way out of the prison. And that is the way through the speed of light.
Well, do we need to do this collectively? Or is individually and the observer effect going to create that superluminal, longitudinal, ability for love to bend time and do all the time travel, and maybe even teleportation if we looked at it in that way?
That's very much the right question. And let's talk about that psychologically, if we may. I'm remembering the day we were in Australia and we were measuring the brainwave harmonics, looking for golden ratio alpha to beta. This wonderful lady came on stage, we measured her brainwave harmonics, and they were a mess. And she went out at lunchtime with our shaman, and he found out all kinds of childhood trauma, and they worked through it, and she cried. She came back after lunch, and she made the most beautiful brainwave harmonic picture that we had ever seen to that point. I mean, alpha, beta, 4 harmonics in golden ratio. I mean, it was the holy grail of brainwaves, Her brainwaves were out, and she was having tears of bliss. She had released her childhood, it's classic, it's archetypal, it's simple, but it's true. Now, what she did was she learned how to relax through the pain and find out what centered it all, and therefore learn to charge implode her aura to critical mass. Now, the reason that Gurdjieff said that you initially need a group in order to have enough critical mass of bliss to even feel bliss for the first time, but after you learned regularly to make bliss with a group, soul group, for example, hopefully lucid dream together, through the heart of the sun together, then eventually you could do that by yourself. But the first time you have bliss experience, often people need a group in order to get the necessary critical mass of charge inertia, which is a good introduction to soul group and collective lucid dreaming as well. Does that address your question at all?
Oh, my goodness. Yeah, and prompted about 12 dozen more. But okay, so let's just recap a little bit. You were talking about the tornado, and the shaman needs to eat the pain, needs to be compassionate with the pain, which you described as anger. But so if we looked at anger as a gift so that we could then relax through the pain in this way, we no longer have to resist things that appear to create anger.
Well, if you look at the Centac wave shapes, the geometry of love versus anger shows very clearly in the millions of measurements that have been made, Manfred Klein Centacs, goldenmean.info/touch. And we have those pictures. But the wave shape of if you squeeze someone with a hug that says, I love you, the point of maximum pressure in the duration of the squeezing process comes at delayed in 0.618 into the duration of the event, and that's called a love hug, which is implosive. However, if you squeeze someone's arm to say you're angry, and that's been measured thousands of times, the point of maximum pressure comes at 1/7 into the duration of the event, which is maximum destructive wave interference. And obviously, if you're wanting to kick the money changers out of the temple, you might need maximum destructive wave interference. Yeah, you might need anger, but please don't identify with it because it is also self-destructive. But behind that is the physics of why that tornado or anything, but let's talk about the tornadoes. Why would a tornado be angry? Why would it be feeling pain? Well, I'll give you 2 examples. A tornado is obviously only survives when it become more and more centripetal, and it doesn't want to die, just like you and me. Now, if the tornado passes over a metal city full of electrosmog and metal buildings, it's going to immediately lose all its centripetal force. So this is going to be very painful to that tornado, and it should appropriately feel anger. That city has killed it, and it knows it, and it ain't happy about it. And if you want to feel compassion for that anger, that tornado, this is why tornadoes are famous for killing metal trailer parks and famous for avoiding sacred stone structures, because the stone structure will allow it to charge and implode and live on in the metal buildings. Now, deeper than that, the tornado should be angry because humans refuse to talk to them. Actually, they refuse to talk to their elemental forces and their gnomes, and the gnomes are the tornado spheres archetypally. So because humans refuse to even speak to the living plasma in their environment called gnomes, elementals, and nature spirits, the nature spirits regard the humans as drunken and stupid, and they should. And humans who ignore the elemental forces deserve the anger of their tornadoes, and they deserve tornadoes that kill them.
Oh, there's so many actually personal questions that I want to ask you about gnomes and go that direction, but I'm going to do my best to stay on track here. Let's talk about I Thrive or Flame in Mind. Doesn't that help with entrainment to teach people how to come into this frequency?
Well, yeah, that was the idea. So in fact, if we bring up that little slide here, the brainwave biofeedback system, flameinmind.com, is designed to fundamentally teach people to make alpha, which is here. Because the alpha, remember, is the Schumann harmonic 8 to 12 hertz. And once you're able to make right, left hemisphere alpha and relax into it, then the beta can become coherent, which is here, higher frequency. And then the theta, and it's called theta healing, but we measure it. The other people who talk about theta healing don't measure, we measure it. And so when this cascade of harmonics becomes a golden ratio cascade in the brain waves, obviously, this was me having a bliss experience because I was realizing at that moment that my new gadget, flameinmind.com, was working thanks to Patrick Baught's programming. But now, obviously, we can measure when you succeed, but how do we make you succeed, or how do we teach you? Well, that's where the flame in sound comes from, the binaural beats. If you have the correct exact phonon frequency recipe here, and then if you do this in a structure, we have actually copper pyramids to do this now. So you have the sound, and then if you douse the place where you do it, et cetera, et cetera. So eventually, you can make this brainwave series. And I remind you that the way to measure which children who can see without their eyes, as Korotkov did, is to measure when they get golden ratio in their brains. Flameinmind.com.
Golden ratio in the brain. So this is an aha moment. These aha moments are what gives us access to other dimensions and take us right back to gratitude. So let me ask, okay, go ahead.
And make us centripetal, and it's a heavy moment because actually we made some gravity too, but go ahead. Yes. Okay,
so that brought me back to what you had said earlier about when I first dropped in and said, hey, Dan, will you do this call with me? You said you were meditating. So what I'm wondering is, when I'm in gratitude for somebody, as I would have been in that moment for you, knowing I can reach out and talk to you about this, would that have like a longitudinal, would we have been connected, although, unknowingly, I guess, with the beta brain, but would that, is that a ripple effect that is a positive thing? So where I'm going with this is, you said that we need to have both constructive and destructive, obviously, ability, but is it just that we're moving toward a more sophisticated means of being able to handle all of these frequencies simultaneously? Is that what we're going for?
Well, let's talk about that in terms of what might be called DNA radio. We know that every Druid phone call, every pyramid, every cathedral, every Agnihotra, and every Theraphi that's done right, have all been placed at Earth magnetic line cross points. And we know that where magnetic lines cross, the process it's called four-wave mixing in physics, and in traditional indigenous peoples, it's called the sacred four directions. And when that happens, the pine cones kiss noses accurately, and which is exactly how lasers have to meet precisely to phase conjugate. And that creates embedding to this longitudinal wave, which is faster than light, which enables the coupling of biologic information at a distance. It is fundamental. The primary example, which I've mentioned 100 times, but it bears repeating. So when Korotkov followed the Cozy Rev mirror people around the planet, and I was there for the installation in Belgium, and you place this giant metal cylinder, which actually metal is a poor choice, but we now know the dielectrics of it. And the Cozy Rev mirror, it's a phase conscious mirror, and they documented dozens of times they got military quality telepathy every time with a person sitting here and 2,000 miles away, there's another person, and they're in this Cozy Rev mirror, and again, their telepathy is military accuracy telepathy every time. So DNA radio is obviously working. Now, the first step to knowing where to stick one of those gadgets was, and I was there, they get out a magnetometer and measure in nanoteslas whether there's an Earth magnetic line cross at that place. That's how you start. That's how you start a labyrinth. That's how you start a cathedral. That's how you know where to get born and to die. And that's where Bruce Cathy measured a change in nuclear critical mass. And it's all because of longitudinal embedding. And it's a total physics of all, not just the cellular communication, DNA, radio, but all the spiritual stories, every one of them, including what you have to do at death or lucid dream if you want to get distributed. So longitudinal wave mechanics, for that reason, is very important. So did that address your question? DNA radio. Does that help? The action at a distance physics. So now that means, now we know why Agnihotra works. At sunrise and sunset, your hair stands up, and then you get this amazing fertility effect. You've imploded the plasma.
Yes, and that speaks to the labyrinth, even if you do it only in meditation, bringing you back to that turning inside out, where now you are actually maybe enhancing, I don't know, the fractal capacitance is what maybe is bringing us into that coherent state. And if you are envisioning or walking through the labyrinth, then this is also what we are doing. You know, I happen to have the idea to ask you the question when I was doing a Theraphi meditation. So, you know, so that 4-wave mixing you were speaking about is what's happening in the Theraphi. Tell us a little bit about the Theraphi. And I see you have another slide up. So,
well,
go ahead.
Because we taught labyrinth science for many years, and we were teaching about how if you project the 7-color donut onto flatland, you get the 7-circuit Cretan-Minoan labyrinth, and which is animated here and here, which is kind of turning inside out perfected. And just one example, if you ride your horse right here on that labyrinth, what you learn is how to embed your aura more centripetally on your horse, so you steer with one center of gravity intuitively, which then gives you more leverage on the aura of your horse. But there's all kinds of spiritual psychology goes to the labyrinth. But the whole point is that if you want to install that labyrinth correctly, the first step, and here we're actually doing it in Torino, the first step is to make the magnetic map, find that magnetic cross point, and you start there, and that creates a dimpled embedding, and that talks about the physics of reality. Yeah, here's the labyrinth project in Torino. That we taught classes in this for many years. So yes, exactly, the turning inside out process, if it's properly embedded in the Earth grid, enables that DNA radio. So that was the first part of your question. But say again the second part of your question.
Well, let's see. So I was thinking in terms of the Theraphi, the tubes of the Theraphi, and you were talking about 4-wave mixing.
Yes. Well, the Theraphi was originally based or inspired by the work of Antoine Priory, and we discovered that he tripped over close to the right frequencies because of Tesla and Rife. However, and Minkowski used golden ratio as well. However, Priory did not know what phase conjugation was, so he didn't know that in order to conjugate, you need a pair of opposites exactly 180 degrees out of phase, which is the beginning of 4-wave mixing, which is why there have to be 2 tubes, which is why there has to be 2 hemispheres in your brain, called BIOS, and the bicameral. And so that creates that place very accurately where the pine cones can implode and kiss noses accurately at the Planck threshold, and that implosion there creates the centripetal force and the negentropy, which is the resultant rejuvenation, which is famous. And also, if you think about what pain is failure to compress. Any doctor can tell you that. So if you restore compression, it's by definition electrically the opposite of pain. But then there's the aspect of what enables that to work best, which is to say, have the best longitudinal embedding, because when it implodes at the Planck threshold, then it enables that longitudinal compressional wave to propagate efficiently. So the Theraphi works better if you find a magnetic cross point for the same reason as a labyrinth and cathedral require one. And by the way, it also works better at sunrise and sunset for the same reason that Agnihotra does. And by the way, if you want to do action at a distance, and Theraphi systems are famous for that, healing people at a difference, there's all kinds of hundreds of detailed reports coming about. It's an amazing story. It's quite effective. But it's also helpful if the sender and the receiver understand some of that. For the same reason, that's how you make druid phone calls and install ancestor burial grounds in the same physics. So it's about that longitudinal wave size. And Theraphi is a good example.
And I want to come back to the Agnihotra. However, before we get too far away from Theraphi, let me ask for you to comment on the importance of creating through your thought. Oh, yes.
My Agnihotra dish right here. See, the living plasma is the ghee, the butter burning. And you have, this is underneath it, gold or copper, and then there's a giant one underneath that, and it's precisely at sunrise, sunset, and that's plasma, and it's precisely aligned in four-wave mixing, and I felt my hair stand up at the Agnihotra Center in Poland, precisely when the computer said it was exactly sunrise, sunset, and this was, you know, practically a desert area all around, but this one farm where they were doing all this Agnihotra, and at Bhopal and at Nagasaki, those who did the Agnihotra made a huge difference. So that was centripetal. Go ahead, you were saying.
Well, first let me tell you that I have this idea that we're going to do Agnihotra, and it'll be in Ireland, and I don't know where, but anyways, I'm going to get back on topic here. And that was with regard to the Theraphi and the field that's created when you, you know, you go into the Theraphi with a certain frequency that's been created. You have an intention, let's say, and we've all done so many studies with intention, Lynn McTaggart and so on. But if you just surrender, so you have your intention, you're in the Theraphi, and you release it, or you just surrender it. What I was getting about the magnetic field, and not that it's not related to the electromagnetic field, but the magnetic field in particular, as it relates to the longitudinal, let's say, phase conjugation of that all that is, that oneness, of being able to access the all that is.
Well, it's beautiful that we have a spiritual language to talk about these things, and you're very intuitive that way, to try to add the sort of a bit of scientific rigor to that conversation. I would make a few observations. One is the Theraphi plasma is profoundly healing, as medical literature has documented now that cold atmospheric plasma is profoundly healing as well. It's one of the hottest subjects in medicine today, is the fact that cold atmospheric plasma is profoundly healing, for example, for cancer. There's hundreds. It's well known now. But they don't know, of course, the best way to make plasma that's cold is called phase conjugate negentropy, phase conjugation perfected. So this is not new information. And the other thing that's not new is medical literature is absolutely clear that strong negative ion wind is powerfully healing antibiotic. If you got, spinal meningitis, kick the bug out with enough negative ion wind, man. This negative ion wind stuff is serious. Well, it turns out, and this is not new to medicine, it turns out the same physics that enables a negative ion to survive is the physics that enables Theraphi plasma to survive. It's the same physics, which is obviously biological materials, natural environment, eliminate metal, large metal surfaces will kill a negative ion and will kill a Theraphi plasma because it's a cloud of charge, obviously. Now, natural fabrics and natural materials have high dielectric constant, which is charge distribution permitted, charge distribution invited. For the same reason, when our friend Marty Kane, one of the best labyrinth teachers in the world, she met an elemental out in the country in Western New York and took it back with her into the city of Boston, and the elemental couldn't couldn't stay there very long. It's because the dielectric constant of that place would dissipate a cloud of charge. For the same reason you cannot photograph orbs as well as in nature in a metal building. No way. It's all about plasma charge distribution. So we understand the physics pretty well. We know how to set it up. We know why. We know the science. So that cloud will then become like your pet puppy dog, and it will talk to you. And if somebody enters the room that's afraid and tense, or worse, if they're doubtful, that plasma cloud, just like your pet kitty, will not like them. So the cloud of charge around the Theraphi, particularly if it's been the same place for a long time, that cloud of charge will be like the family pet. And the family pet has to like you. And it's not easy for the family pet to like you. You have to walk in and be very relaxed and very permissive. And then the kitty will run its motor. And the Theraphi plasma is the same way because it's self-aware. It should be, okay? That cloud of charge knows who it can help and who it's a. So what does that have to do with the intent? And this was the last part of your question. First of all, when we did the medical, well, I call it a medical study, we did a study with the best biodynamic scientists in France, Laurent, who brought his live blood cell microscopy, and we proved with dozens of trials that the 70% of people in the Theraphi had a dramatic declumping, deroulé of the blood cells in the live blood cell microscopy, which we know is super healthy because then it becomes stronger and more blood cells. The same reason that water is more powerful if the molecules are declumped, the cells are the same way. So the 30% of people who did not get the benefit were correlated, we did a bit of psychology, asked questions, were correlated with those who admitted they were not able to relax completely, which we now know why, because if you don't relax well, you don't become conductive, which doesn't permit charge. So you see what intent is doing. What his intent is doing is setting the centripetal foci to give direction. So that cloud would love it if you have intent, particularly if that intent is a shareable wave, because then the cloud will grow and not die.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for bringing us back to the scientific language, because that's really what I need here. But there's two things that brought up. Number one was kind of the Buddhist, what do they say, the Eightfold Path, and how that relates to thyroid, if we could address that. But also, okay, instead of giving you two questions at once, and then after that, we'll move on to the heart, to the 5-spin inside and the 7-spin outside.
Right. Well, the thyroid gland is triggered below the pineal, and the physics of Kundalini climaxes in the high glands. We know that from the Bentoff work, and he was my mentor, who measured the phase lock of the sacrocranial low-frequency harmonics, which are nicely measured and taught by iThrive.com, ITHRVE.com. By measuring the low frequencies in your heart, you can measure whether your Mayer wave and the lower tidal frequencies of the sacrocranial are pumping, which is the physics of Kundalini and bliss. And as Upledger proved, it's clinically impossible to be depressed if your spine liquid is pumping. So that whole process then drives the high glands. But if you think about where that starts around the heart, leading us to the second part of your question, when you thump your thymus and say, mea culpa, mea culpa, mea culpa, and the priest supposedly translated that and said, through my fault, through my fault, through my most grievous fault, meaning guilt, 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 guilt. The priest was wrong. Actually, that's not what it means at all. When you're thumping your thymus, which is a large gland, shaped like an umbrella surrounding the heart, it's the umbrella designed like a catcher's mitt, literally, to catch the phonon harmonics of the heart. And those phonon harmonics are like tinker toys, which are assembled as sound waves impinging on the thymus. And that's how the white blood cells of the immune system are made and programmed. So obviously we know for sure that if you feel a lot of love and bliss, you won't have disease. Well, it's called harmonic inclusive. Now we know how that works. Those harmonics thump the thymus. So it isn't, you're not saying mea culpa, you're saying, I take responsibility for. That's really what it means, which is to say, I will become the center the widening gyre with the center that cannot hold, you know? So if by taking responsibility for the harmonics entering your thymus from your heart, and that's the spin array picture, which is the last part of your question, which is the 7-5 spin. And I think we can dig out, there's lots of places where that picture is, but one of the places is this, where we did this work on, we were doing the power spectra of alphabet harmonics, and it's at goldenmean.info/goldenarches. Yeah, there it is. So, you know, here's the picture of the heart harmonics, and what's happening in this animation is you're grabbing a hold of the centripetal center of your heart harmonics when this is my friend here in Western New York, before and after heart coherence. And when the heart was coherent on the bottom, the harmonics lined up and you grabbed a hold of the center of your heart and you took responsibility for. And this is called golden arches, and that's why the article. And this is the picture of the 7 spins outside here. This is the 7 layers of human heart muscle from the Pettigrew dissections, which are exactly tilted on the 7 axial spin symmetry axes of the tetrahedron 7arrows.net. And in the center, you have the 5 spins. There's 5 spins inside. Let's see the picture. There's 5 spins inside, 7 spins outside here. And we have more pictures of that. And this
that one right there. That one right there. If you were to trace that picture of the heart, would that give you the same effect as walking through a labyrinth? You know, like in that picture you had of the heart, you know, it goes.
You mean this one?
No, it had all the lines. You know, you show the direction that it moves around the heart.
This one?
Oh, you had it 1 second before I. But anyways, carry on, Dan. Oh yeah, right about that one, I think, or not. I'm sorry to interrupt. You carry on.
Well, there's 7 arrows in the heart. Well, and those heart muscle animations then are in much more detail in the original PowerPoint called Implosion Full Sequence. And in the heart harmonic section here, yeah, here we go. So you see, there are 7 arrows through the tetracube here, and that the heart muscle here at the center is the golden spiral. It's literally 5 spins inside, 7 spins outside. And if we look at that here, you see the sigil of truth, which became the Anu, the Ophanim Enochian, with 7 spins outside, 5 spins inside. And if you animate that, I think the actual animation is here. You can actually play it. So here's the 7 arrows through the tetrahedron. I don't know how much phase delay is there in reaching your screen, but so the 7 color map of where all colors touch every other color on the self-organizing golden spiral, 5 spins inside, 7 spins outside. So 7 color map, the 7 arrows actually touch. One set of arrows touches every color, and every color touches every other color, which is a profound solution in the physics, in topology physics, which was originally developed in anthroposophy and Pettigrew's dissections and Marinelli's work. The heart is not a pump. So the final thought there from the biodynamic heart is not a pump Marinelli was that the heart is now throwing the blood in a spiral vortex. So the heart is not pumping. The heart is rather throwing a sequence of vortex tornadoes, literally donuts. And those those tornadoes travel to the periphery in the blood, maintaining their phase angle, which is the alphabet of the heart, the title of my first book. And the sonic shadow of that spiral on the torus is the physics of how the original spectrograms of the Hebrew alphabet was done by Carlos Suarez, which then I replicated in my book, Alphabet of the Heart. We showed that the harmonic signature of the sounds of the Hebrew alphabet, Alpha, Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, made the letters. And that was the other picture we had here, that golden arches picture, was we actually, so the spectrograms, and here they are. So here's Aleph, Beit, Gimel, and here is the frequency signature, and here is the picture of the letter forms. So the harmonic analysis of the sounds of the alphabet letters, which are literally the alphabet of the heart, make the pictures of the letters themselves, which is a very profound introduction to the psychophysics behind sacred alphabets. So anyway, hopefully that was a bit of a happily ever after.
Well, that is, yes, and that is a very profound solution, as you were saying. And it brings us right back to what you had said earlier about the Sanskrit and the Hebrew being within, just depending on the angle and the perspective.
Right, that's in the original article, goldenmean.info/DNA ring, where it's a big article, but if in the lower part of that, here's the animation. So let's see if this will play on your screen there. If we get any packet collisions, but so this is the 7-color map of the torus in the center here in green, and there's the ABCs up top. But yeah, so that's Aleph, and there's Beit.
Are you sharing a screen? Because I don't see it.
Oh, okay. Let me see. I'm not having a screen. Oh, I didn't. Bear with me just 30 seconds. That's my mistake. Okay, so here we are. Yeah, so hopefully, so there you're seeing the top is just a spiral, and this is here, Aleph, Beit. Is this animation coming through? I imagine.
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Oh, Beit. So there you have the origin of Hebrew, and this is another 3-dimensional version of it. So this is all our animations, goldenmean.info/DNA ring, and there's your heart, 5 spins inside, 7 spins outside. But then if we scroll down here, look at the Hebrew versus the Sanskrit. And again, this is a big, this is our original work on the origin of alphabets, and it's gotten a little big here. But, and this is from Lord of the Ring. You see, there is only one ring that can unite them all, and that's the ancient Finno-Ugaric, which was used to write the book Lord of the Ring, and we now know what the ring was, what the letters were. So yeah, here we have. So let's see if we can zoom in just a little bit here. Yeah, there we go. Okay. So you see, in the Hebrew on top, the tagin or crownlet, 3 little arrows there, were to indicate to the rabbi where the symmetry axis went through the tetracube to give you a point of reference from which to navigate. Remember, you need to be able to visualize these letters when you lucid dream and when you die and when you make a golem, because they determine the phase angle of the electromagnetic toroid of your plasma, which is the only way you steer when you're dead and when you're dreaming. Because the new equations have proven that that same spiral and that same torus is how you make gravity, which is why the Vimana and the Nazi Bell were called a Mercury vortex, and we have the equations. So this becomes a plasma projector. It is a gravity maker, absolutely. So anyway, on the right-hand side, you see the same shapes here that's happened in Sanskrit is, instead of taking the tagin or crownlet, which the rabbi did, they used a vertical and horizontal bar to indicate your orientation with respect to the tetracube, but it's the same letter shapes. So this is plasma physics. That's what it is. It's a universal language. It's absolute physics. And our friend John McGovern, who writes all the papers on ancient shaman alphabets in plasma physics for Los Alamos Plasma Research Center with Tony Peratt, writes all the papers with the physicists now, claims he can read every shaman's cave painting in every country because the shaman was seeing plasma. It's plasma science. Okay. So we have fun with that, and that article about that is goldenmean.info/whale dreamers, talks about Tony Peratt and John McGovern, my friends.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to diving into more of that one of these days. But what you said was it's our orientation to the phase angle. So does that not also bring us back to the thoughts that you're having when you're in the Theraphi? You know, would that to create a specific frequency?
Well, yes. For example, if you ask the rabbi how he creates a golem, which is similar to asking a horse whisperer how it works, actually, uh, he, he says, I close my eyes and I fill my visual cavity, which we now know is a hologram in the optical cortex, Carl Friedrich, with one letter at a time. Now we know what that letter is. It's the shadow of one particular locked-in tilt of this torus, which is to say it is plasma projected in a certain vector direction, one direction only. And the unique thing about Hebrew and Sanskrit letters is that each letter indicates only one possible angle of tilt. There is no other symmetry. Every letter is totally indicative of one direction only. And now we know that's a vector propulsion directory. If you happen to know why an object falls to the ground, you know this is the origin of propulsion. Actually, this is how you make gravity. And this is, remember, when you're an astronaut, you gotta cool your jets and you gotta navigate. You need to know how to focus that plasma. And that's what the Aboriginals call the dream time and the sunrise.
All right, and with that conversation around gravity, if we could bring it back to the gnome or the earth elements or the earth, the elementals, let's say, then what's the correlation between seeing, interacting, engaging with an elemental and then their ability to not be constrained by gravity? So I've had a personal experience with what to me was a gnome, a guy that was very, I could smell him. That was the most significant receptor activated. but more specifically, you know, like their method of travel, you know, as opposed to trying to anthropomorphize everything, you know, what's the scientific explanation for this?
Well, that's a wonderful. I think it's very cool that you had those sensitivities. I admire that. I want to say to you, but we did a lot of work with the gnomes, and my people who work with gnomes, Richard Leviton, for example, were very careful to say that you do not mess with them. They're big, and be careful, and they can play with you, but. You know, if we don't steer big elementals, and the gnomes are large ones, then large elemental forces like tornadoes and storms go into chaos, actually. So yes, it is necessary. And it also, I would say, beautiful that you perceived by smell. If you understand even a little bit of Phil Callahan's work that I documented in my documentary film, Professor Phil Callahan in Florida, where he was proving the physics of olfaction is not one particle per billion, as conventional physics to say. That's crap. Actually, no. If you ever saw a hummingbird slamming repeatedly into the window of a sealed house in midwinter because a lady inside was having bliss and the hummingbird smelled that nectar, you understand what Phil Callahan proved, that the most of the sense of olfaction propagates measurably in the infrared. Actually, that's why it goes through windows. and so now we know why, you know, the Steiner biodynamic anthroposophic Waldorf school class of children is taught. First, they visualize so accurately the sequence of the unpacking of the rows. They make the drawings. And then they're to close their eyes as a whole class and visualize the rows popping open. And the test for that class, if they have succeeded and done the exercise correctly, is the room must fill with the smell of roses. And it works very well, and we understand the physics perfectly. The flowering brain is then emitting the correct infrared, which is called smell.
Which would also describe how a shaman can light a flame, a candle, let's say, in a different location But that's a very appropriate example, the hummingbird, because when that gnome came to me, before the gnome came, I was told to go outside and lay with my belly on the earth. And what the gnome's message was is that I'm going to become pregnant. So your hummingbird example is very appropriate.
Yeah, it is about bliss. And that's why we call it flame in mind, because you literally can light a flame at a distance. And there's the famous holy light story in Jerusalem where the priests light spontaneous. Well, we now know the plasma physics of why. The longitudinal interferometry can light a flame at a distance, which is the ultimate solution to fusion energy. For sure, the whole problem with fusion energy is heat containment. Well, they don't even know how to do longitudinal interferometry. So of course they can't contain the heat. They don't know what a flame in mind is.
Well, that brings us back, if you don't mind, to share a little bit about how our audience can learn more about Flame in Mind, I Thrive, and even the Theraphi. Not that I want to ever end conversations with you, Dan, but we are coming up to, I think, about an hour.
Yes, it's true.
My clock is far away, so I'm peering over into the distance there, but I feel like we're getting close.
It's 5-2, yeah. Well, I mean, we have developed now, we have thousands of films that accompany each of our major web projects. So the Flame in Mind, flameinmind.com. It's very detailed. We're now 4-channel. We can teach front brain versus rear brain dominance. So you can be in the flow, full 4-channel. And we're going to add very soon full 2-channel EKG to actually measure empathy and tantra and teach lovers to link hearts by measurement. And the largest bank in Australia bought the old system to do that, and that which used to cost $3,000. Now we're going to be about 10% of that cost for full 2-channel EKG. So flameinmind.com has flame and sound and life force measure and architectural measure and tree measure. It's all at flameinmind.com and the binaural bliss. Now the I Thrive, the HRV, harmonics, the breath entrainment, and sacrocranial is ithrve.com, ithrive.com, and the educational material there is amazing. And our programmer has the supplemental website, which is craniosacral-app.com. And of course, the Theraphi, the material at the Theraphi blog is exploding. We've got new stuff almost every day at the Theraphi blog, theraphi.net. And you see the blog there. There's dozens and dozens of new updates. It's really cooking. It's beautiful. We're in 20 countries. And so the science and material is there. Our educational outreach is working. Our Facebook page now has tens of thousands, and our YouTube channel is now approaching 1 million views. I mean, we're doing very well. The outreach is happening, thanks to people like you.
Oh, well, thank you. Excuse me. And so everyone, the rigorous science behind a very simple question, how do you do it and what do you do, is now yours. And I want to thank you, Dan. I want to give you an opportunity to conclude with any other thoughts that maybe you think is appropriate or important before we close. Is there anything else?
Well, just maybe one final thought, which is just to encourage you to not think that you have to think about and understand all of this. But if you do one simple thing, which is to try to get as healthy and peaceful as possible, at least once a day, for total relaxation, peacefulness, and then get very still and feel your aura get very big, and then notice the difference in your lucid dreaming. This is your transverse electromagnetic aura becoming longitudinal propagation coherent, ability to lucid dream and take memory through death. And bliss is, of course, very helpful. But just the very simple act of doing that relaxation and focusing on that, once at sunrise and sunset are ideal if you can. So just realize that your actual work is simple. It is to grow your aura. Thank you.
That is very simple, and that would be the hygiene of peace. So we thank you so much once again, Dan, for being that which is shareable with all DNA, for teaching us about that and sharing your insights on that. I appreciate your time, your insights so much. And I know that everyone here will very much agree with me and be in appreciation for that you have shared this time with us again today.
You're pretty special too, Shelley. Thank you. Blessings. See you all. Stay in touch.
Thank you.
Love
Bye
you.
for now.
Bye-bye.